Welcome back to Finding Your Frequency. I'm Brian Sexton, joined again by Dr. Josh Wilkerson from Restoring Mathematics. And you know, we've talked before, but it never hurts to remind people about your mission there to restore faith in the education of mathematics. How's it going, Dr. Wilkerson?
It's going well so far. We have an event this summer that we're hosting called the Restoring Mathematics Roundtable in Austin, Texas. And folks can check out our website at restoringmath.com to get more details. But we currently have over 50 educators who are going to join us and are interested in having this conversation about what does restoring faith in mathematics look like.
RestoringMathematics.com, folks. You certainly want to check that out. And we've got a special guest from the University of Arkansas, Dr. Albert Cheng, who runs the Classical Education Research Lab. Dr. Cheng, welcome. How are you today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on the show.
We're glad to have you. Hey, give us an overview, a mission statement of what you're trying to accomplish there with the Classical Education Research Lab.
Well, sure. Yeah, the lab here exists to empirically evaluate the effectiveness of classical education. So we hope to produce research papers and findings and articles that will both inform policymakers about classical education, but also practitioners such as Dr. Wilkerson, who teach at a classical school, school leaders at classical schools to help to improve their practice.
Yeah. So, Albert, can you speak to a little bit why you think it's important to have kind of an educational research mindset for classical education? Like, how that's so foundational to just public education in general, but how have you found that with this kind of new burgeoning classical school movement, this idea of actually applying some educational research to that field?
Yeah. Well, you know, the reason I got into this was I just realized there was a dearth of people doing empirical research in classical education. And so, you know, I come from with priors that, hey, I think there's something to this kind of education. I think it works. And you hear anecdotes a lot about teachers who say it works. You hear anecdotes from families and students who've gone through classical schools, but you know, those anecdotes might be valid, but it also helps if what we really want to get at is it really effective? Is this true? Do those anecdotes generalize? The way to best answer that question is to gather data and conduct formal research about it, empirical research. And so hopefully with the work that I do, it'll give us a better evidence base for what's working and what's not working in classical education. And hopefully these research findings will inform people who are in classical education, policymakers. You know, really, we like to say in classical education, we're here to seek the truth, and doing empirical research is just one of the ways to do that. It's not the only way, but one of the ways. And so that's really how I got into doing this, and I think this really matters.
So I know we've gotten to know each other through a joint project looking specifically at math teachers in classical education and kind of best practices for teaching math. And we've been working with John Gregg at Hillsdale and Stanley Shinetsky at Restoring Mathematics, who we had on the show previously. And so I know that you've been looking at the data that's been initially gathered for that kind of ongoing project and have done some presentations on just initial results. Can you give us kind of a summary in your own words of what that project is and what are some initial findings that are interesting?
Yeah, sure, Josh. Yeah, so with this project, what we were interested in examining was what do math teachers in particular, but also just other leaders and educators in classical schools, what do they believe an ideal math classroom should look like? What is the ideal in terms of an emphasis for the class? Like, should it focus on preparing kids for future employment, right? So develop math skills and so they can then apply them to other jobs. Should it focus on the history of math? Should it focus on cultivating wonder and joy and beauty, which is a big part of classical education? But we also were wondering about what do classical teachers and leaders believe about how math should be taught. Should the teacher have expertise teaching math or math knowledge, content knowledge? Should teachers teach in a way where they're mostly demonstrating procedure, or should they really leave a lot of room for students to kind of discover and wrestle with new problems? And so at the end of the day, I think people might have guesses for what classical math teachers believe, but no one's really sure because we've never really looked and no one's really polled the entire population of them. So in the study, we designed an experiment that was designed to make teachers pick versions of their ideal classroom, so we could kind of disentangle what aspects of the math classrooms that they cared about. And so just some top line findings from this research. One, we were struck by how much math teachers, but also other leaders and teachers in classical schools really believed that the purpose of a math class ought to be to cultivate joy, wonder, and in mathematics and show students the beauty of math. And certainly to emphasize that more than, say, the practical application of mathematics. And so in some sense, I think most teachers and leaders within the classical movement would see that as encouraging finding, because, and that's the kind of thing that they want to emphasize in their education. But we also saw some other interesting things. One is that teachers differed in their opinions about what an ideal math classroom ought to look like. So one of the things we found was that teachers who received training in teaching math classically, or teachers who've been in a classical school for a longer period of time, were more likely to believe that an ideal math classroom should emphasize cultivating joy and wonder in mathematics. Teachers who hadn't gone to a similar sort of training or are kind of new to classical education, they were more likely to still think that a math classroom ought to emphasize preparing kids for future employment. And so, what we're seeing here is not necessarily a uniform voice, but certainly I think these kinds of findings do raise questions for, hey, what are we to do if we want to train our teachers better, train our leaders better into really delivering something that we want to deliver also.
Thanks, Albert. I know that both you and I and the rest of the research team I mentioned will be at the Society for Classical Learning Conference this summer. So if anyone is going to be in attendance there, they can come check out a full deep dive presentation on all of the results and get to all the fun math behind the math education.
And thank you,
Absolutely.
gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on this panel to discuss classical education and mathematics. Dr. Albert Cheng at the University of Arkansas. Thank you so much for your time today, sir. And Dr. Wilkerson, we'll see you next time on Finding Your Frequency.